Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I've been asked to share the story here of our ERP implementation, so I wanted to walk you through the steps that we took to do that. Um, and um, and so let's get started. I wanted to start here with a little bit of a background on our company, so you can understand the kind of company we are today and how what we were then, so that you can see how that aligns to your company. So just a bit of history here. JCA technology started in around 2000. Our founder started building wire harnesses in his mom's garage and started to sell those wire harness capabilities to companies in Western Canada, focusing mostly on the ag market. And he was pretty successful in building up a business there, focusing on ag, eventually mining as well, and bus as well. And in around 2013, he decided to expand the scope of the company and added an engineering element to it. So he hired his first engineer at that time, and that person worked on building up an engineering team to the point where we were designing and manufacturing electronics and offering to the ag market full electronic control systems that would perform different functions on the machinery, hydraulic control, electronic control over hydraulics, and so on. That engineering team has continued to evolve, and today they're really focused on providing automation in agriculture, so autonomous vehicles performing ag functions really independently from human operators. So and we're continuing down that path. Just a bit of information on the companies. So we were JCA Technologies around 2 years ago. We were acquired by AGCO, and then since then merged with a division of Trimble. So today we are PTx Trimble. Without going into all the details, that's where we are today. Today we're around 200 employees, but at the time of the ERP implementation, which was in 2019, so 5 years ago, we were around 100 employees, and the majority of those people were production staff. So a little bit more here just about us. So wire harness manufacturing, the bulk of what we build in production is our wire harnesses. We also build control panels, and we do the final assembly on our electronic products. Our building is about 13,000 square feet. Our wire harnesses are built to print, so we receive drawings in a wide variety of formats from our customers, and we need to interpret those drawings and turn them into documentation that we can build against. So from an ERP standpoint, we're creating part numbers, we're setting up bill of materials and routings and so on in the system, and driving material demand and so on all through our ERP system. We're very much a high mix, low volume manufacturing plant. So as an example, in 2022, we built and shipped 70,000 wire harnesses, but that was across 900 different part numbers. So on average, about 75, 80 parts per part number. So lots of variability. Some harnesses are complex, some harnesses are simple, some have low volume, some have higher volume, some have short-term requirements, some have longer-term POs. So we deal with a lot of different variables. So when we got into the ERP system, so prior to say in 2018 and before, we were really running two different systems. We had Sage, which was our managing our financial data, and that was essentially our ERP system. And we had developed an in-house access database, which was our MRP system. And these two systems were not connected. So the access database would handle our inventory and our material planning and our work orders through the plant, and Sage would handle our AR and our AP and so on. But the two really weren't connected. Today, I can't even tell you how we were managing that because they really weren't giving a good picture of how the business was running. So we knew we needed to take a step and introduce an ERP system that was going to manage all that data across both the material side and the financial side. We knew that the company was growing and that we were taking on more and more business, so we wanted to be able to scale up in a reliable way. And so we're really looking for a tool that was going to help us, quote to cash right across the board. So we started a project to find an ERP system that was going to suit our needs. And so, just to outline the scope, hopefully you can see that okay. The types of functions that we were looking for in our ERP system was quite, even though we were a relatively small company, I think we had a fairly wide footprint in terms of what we were trying to do. So on one hand, we were looking for a CRM system that would help our sales team. We wanted to run quotes through the system so that it could draw upon actual data in terms of costing. We needed, typical functions like order entry. We needed to manage our part database, bill of materials, and our methods being our routings. We wanted a system that helped us with supply chain. Our materials are, again, driven by custom orders. So we buy materials based on tiered pricing, and we wanted a system that was going to help consolidate demand across our material requirements so that we could buy as effectively as possible, as well as evaluate suppliers in terms of their performance, on-time delivery, and quality. We needed an inventory management element to our ERP system to keep track of our stockroom. We wanted a job planning and scheduling element, and as well as job costing. Since each of our products is custom, we want to know how much it costs us to build, a simple harness from a complex harness. So we needed the job costing functionality. Obviously shipping and receiving and all the financial management. And then we also needed a project management element so that we could manage our engineering projects and track financials through those projects as well. So lots of stuff that we needed to accomplish. So we started searching for ERP systems and different tools. And in doing that, we started to put together criteria of what we would look for in an ERP system. So for example, here, we learned very quickly that some ERP systems are designed to support small companies, and other ERP systems are really designed to support very large companies. And so we wanted to make sure that we were in the right size mix, for the ERP system that we were talking to. We wanted to understand the cost of the system, whether there were upfront costs, how the licensing structure worked, and what ultimately would cost us. Again, we were a pretty small company, so we were pretty sensitive to the cost of the system. We wanted to make sure that the system was scalable, that it could grow with us as we grew, and that there wasn't going to be some limitations there. We also wanted to make sure that we had local support. So if we needed help or we had questions, would there be somebody in Winnipeg who could come and see us, or were we always going to be reliant on someone who was remote? We wanted to understand the data migration. What would it take? How would it work to export data out of our current system and then import it into the new system? So we had some discussions up front about how that worked. We were specifically looking for rev control. So our products, as a part changes or has feature changes, what we typically do is rev it up. And we wanted to make sure that the system can handle that kind of part numbering strategy. One thing that we learned through the process and we became, I guess, a little sensitive to is the third-party integrations. We wanted to know how much of what the ERP system was doing was core to its primary functionality, and how many functions got added on through third-party integrations. And it was our opinion that we wanted a tool where what we needed was part of the core functions of the software. We wanted to understand the implementation plan. How would we go through it? And so we had some discussions around that. We were curious if it had a CRM element or a PLM element to it. Would they provide consultants? And what we typically found is that there's often a third-party integrator that we would work with who is trained and knowledgeable in each ERP system. And so we wanted to make sure that existed. We wanted to understand cloud versus on-site options for putting the ERP system in place, and if companies provided both. Again, some of our core functions here, job costing and reporting. Reporting being a key one, I guess. Some tools are very good at managing transactions, but not so good at producing reports, and especially graphical reports where you can look at how your business is running. So dashboards was another element that we want to understand. We wanted to understand if it had a test database for trying things and trying new processes, and whether we could do that without affecting our live data. We have products that needed serialization, so we needed that functionality. And then lastly, payroll integration. At the time, we were using Payworks, and we wanted to make sure that the system would integrate with that software. So as we looked at the different ERP options, we had a spreadsheet essentially tracking each of these areas, and we could rate each software platform against each of these areas to say that they either met the requirements, or they didn't have support in a certain area, or maybe it was a maybe, they had something, but not maybe an exact match to what we were looking for. And that allowed us to really narrow down the list of companies down to who we wanted to work with. So in the end, we looked at, I would say, 9 or 10 different platforms that we evaluated. And the process was typically that we would meet with the sales team and talk about what we were looking for. And we found that initially, every one of them said they could do exactly what we were looking for across the board, and so that was interesting to start with. So what we really did is, through that the evaluation of the criteria, we narrowed down the list of companies into a smaller group, and then we arranged another meeting where our intention was to go deeper into the analysis of the tool than what the sales team was probably willing to speak to. So they would bring in more technical experts into those discussions, and we would really dive in. We didn't dive into everything, but if we would talk about part creation, and there were certain attributes to parts that we were interested in, or certain functionality, like rev control for us, and we would really question how would that work within the software. And it wasn't long before, in many cases, we would find that the software didn't exactly match with what we were doing, or maybe it would, but it would require some third-party add-on that would provide that functionality. And so we started to get a much better feel for which software platform was meeting our needs. And I would say that all the platforms were of high value and excellent platforms, but they just didn't all meet our unique business requirements. So there's really no one answer that would meet everybody's needs. But if you think about how your business runs and what your processes are, you want to make sure that the tool you choose is aligned with your needs. So in the end, we selected Epicor. That's the solution we went with as our ERP platform. Just as a comparison, we did look at SAP, and we looked at Oracle. We looked at a higher level of Sage, since we were already using Sage. We looked at a few Microsoft products. We looked at Acumatica, and all very interesting products for sure. But Epicor was the one that we felt best met our requirements. So then the next step is how do you get started from there? So we selected Epicor, and we started to build a relationship with their integrating team. And so internally, we wanted to understand our own data. And so we started to build a list of our part databases, such as our part database, our customer database, our vendor database. And there was static data like that we knew that we were going to have to import into the new system. But then there's also databases of live data, like open orders and invoices and quotes and so on, that change over time. But at the time of go live, we would need to take a snapshot of that data and import it into the new system so that we can transition that data as well. So we started to just document what are all these databases of information. And then we also started to document what our processes are, quoting process, order entry process, and so on, just so that we knew which processes would need to be looked at during our implementation. Once we had that, we had an initial review with the consultant, and they called it a business process review. They came in, sort of interviewed us, and worked to understand our business. And through that, they came up with a list of the things that we needed to cover, as well as the modules within the software that we are going to need to be able to be successful. One, I think it's important here to note the team. So we built a team that had a project manager. I was the project manager internally, and we identified the process owners across the business, also internal people, which were another 6 people. And then we had a third-party integrator who was part of the team. The integrator, I think typically how it would be done is that there would be one person who would focus on the operational aspects of the business, and a second person who would focus on the financial aspects of the business. For us, just the way it worked out, we ended up having one person that did both those things. But we went through a process there as well, and we knew we were going to be working with the consultant for an extended period of time. And we thought it was important that we knew that they were going to be the right fit for the team. So we actually went through an interview process with those consultants, and we asked the consultants to provide their resume and their background, and we arranged an interview and met with each of the consultants before agreeing that they were the right consultants for the team. And I think that actually that was very useful for us. We ended up disqualifying a few consultants through that process, and in a way, that's what led to us having one person look after both the operations and the financial aspects. But I think that helped to avoid some potential challenges that could have come up through the project. So I would recommend doing that as well. The real challenge here is the time, and they told us up front that the team would really need to dedicate 50% of their time for 9 to 12 months. The project manager even more than that, and it seemed at the time that wouldn't be what was required, and it seemed like above what was needed. But in the end, that is what we put in, and it did take quite a bit of time and dedication towards the project. And I would say that as much as that was a challenging thing to do, it was definitely worth it. As I'll talk to that a little bit more as we go here. Licensing also, I wanted to say a few words about licensing. We had to buy licenses right up front to start the planning process, so that we had access to the system. So we didn't get, we only got maybe a handful of licenses just to support those process owners. But the challenging part is that at that point in time, you don't know for sure which modules within the platform you need and which modules you don't. And you're very much reliant on the consultant to give you advice in that area. And in the end, I ended up removing some of the modules because it turned out that we didn't need them. But you're not, at that point in time, you're not familiar enough with the software to confidently say what you need and what you don't need. Obviously, some are obvious, but some were a little bit less clear. For example, Epicor has a quality module that's out of the box, but then there's advanced quality, and then even another advanced quality on top of that. So what level did we need wasn't clear at that point. But you're committing to that cost, I guess, based on the consultant's advice. And then after that, we ended up with concurrent full licenses for office users and MES licenses for our shop floor users. So in our system, our shop floor people are clocking into Epicor when they arrive at work, and they're clocking out when they go home. And then they're also clocking into each job as they work on different jobs through production. And that way we have the system's essentially recording the time that they're spending on each operation, on each job as it moves through the plant. And so the way we did it from there is really just continue to add licenses as needed. So if we could see how our utilization of licenses against how many we had, and if we started to hit that limit, then we would buy new licenses. Because they're concurrent, you can get away with less licenses than you have users, but at peak times during the day, then you're hitting that license limit. So that's how we managed it. And even today, we might still need to add licenses from time to time. We also did do an analysis of a cloud-based system versus an on-site system. And for a cloud-based system, essentially the the company Epicor in our case would own the data, or not own the data, but they would manage the data on their servers, and we would have access to it. And so we had lots of questions about the security of that data and so on. With an on-site implementation, then the data is, could be argued to be more secure. I don't know. Probably that was 5 years ago. Today, we'd probably have a lot more confidence in cloud security than we did then. But we needed to buy a server and manage the data in-house to go with an on-site license. And what we did is did a cost analysis and found that while the on-site approach would have a higher upfront cost, the licensing and the maintenance cost for those licenses was less than a cloud system. So over time, the cloud system became more expensive, and I think the break even was around 4 years for Epicor. So we ended up going with an on-site license, and it's been fine for us. But I think if we were going through it again today, we'd probably lean more towards a cloud-based system, just based on how cloud systems have evolved. And I think a lot of ERP platforms are putting their effort into the cloud systems more so perhaps than the on-site. So then we got into the implementation, and it's really I only have one slide on this, but this is really the meat of the project. This is where you iterate to learn how you're going to get your new system to work. So as an example, let's just say we're trying to understand sales order entry. We would start by reading the documentation on how you enter sales orders in Epicor and learn how that works, right down to the keystrokes of what you do. Then we would look at our current process and understand what's the data that is needed in our sales order entry process. And then we'd try it. We'd enter a sales order in our test environment, and we'd run MRP within the system, and then we'd see how the data would flow through to the next steps in the process. And then we'd go back and we'd try something different, and we'd try it again, and we'd keep go through that iterative process. And I'd say that it's really key to pay attention to that, because I think the functionality of the system and your own internal processes are so closely related that if the system doesn't exactly match your process, then either you gotta find a workaround in the system, or you've got to modify your process. And the process is ingrained into the way that your team already thinks about your business. So it's a close relationship between the system, the process, and almost the culture of the company. So we spent a lot of time on this, doing iterative testing and trying different things, and getting it to the point where, if at one step of the process we needed a piece of data that was going to flow through to the next step in the process so that everybody knows what they have to do, we really tried to think through that process from end to end. And then once we were done, we documented the results. And so as an example, this is just a snip of how we did it. Our consultant had recommended that we document this as a user procedure in a Word document, but I think we felt better that it was going to be presented as a workflow, more of a workflow, still lots of text on it, of course, but more of a workflow that could show the steps on how we do different things. And so if we zoom in here on one of them, creating a new raw material, so raw material would be a purchased part, then there's certain steps on how, first you start by creating the part and the part number and the description and so on. And a lot of this is, of course, unique to Epicor, but we would actually document the steps on how you would create a raw material, and then in the yellow box there are a few open questions. How would we create software part numbers as an example, and how do we set those up so that they get handled correctly by the system? But this was how we really exited the development process, where we had workflows set up in Visio, diagrams like this, and we use this information to train our users. And I would say, this covered certainly our core functions and things that we know that we do on a regular basis. It did not cover all the unique cases and the one-offs and the exceptions and those kind of things we knew that we were going to have to work through after we went live. So then we got to the point where we were ready to go live, and what we did is went through a pilot run, and the pilot run really is going through all the steps of setting up a system. So if you start with a blank instance of your ERP system, of Epicor in our case, first we had to start by configuring the system and setting up all of our workflows and then loading all of the data. And so we did that as a pilot run. And then we tried to see how orders would go through and if everything was flowing through correctly. And we would decide whether it's a pass or fail, meaning pass, we were ready to go live. Fail, let's go back to the drawing board, continue to do some development and do another pilot. And if I recall, I think we did fail the first pilot and decide that we needed to work out a few things. So we went back and changed some things, and then we ran a second pilot. And I would say it wasn't perfect, but it was close enough that we felt that that things would run on day one, and we'd build product and we'd ship product, but there would be the need for a lot of attention to questions and some things that maybe weren't completely ironed out, and that we felt confident enough that we could work through those challenges. So we decided to go ahead and we went live. So we started with user training. And we basically dedicated a weekend and brought in all those process owners. And through that weekend, we did all the configuration and setup, exported all that live data, the open sales orders, the open POs, the open invoices, exported that out of our current systems and imported them into our new system. And on Monday morning, we went live, and we've been live ever since. So that's really the process we went through. Just a few final comments here is, challenges. Certainly it was difficult to commit the time, but it was overall worth it, because as you work through your processes, you find how things are actually working, and you find that maybe one department actually managed their day-to-day with a spreadsheet, and you weren't even aware that the spreadsheet existed, but it's there tracking data and tracking things that is critical to your business, and and you want that ultimately in your ERP system. So we really did learn about how we operated, and we came out of it with a lot of clarity around that. So as difficult as it was, I would say the time was worth it. We did complete our project in 9 months. And after we went live, we certainly had to spend a lot of times continuing to monitor the system, provide support to the team, fix data issues, and just kind of handhold it a bit until things stabilized, which really did take a few more months, I would say, after go live. The other thing I'll note here that I didn't add a point on is we also had an internal IT individual who was very good at SQL and databases and so on. In fact, he's the one that had built our homegrown system, and he was also a very critical piece to supporting the system, because he could make modifications and customizations within the system. And today, we have lots of customizations that are very unique to us. So that's a resource that would probably be useful to have either in-house or as a consultant. So that's my final slide, and that's the story of how we went live with our ERP system.
That's excellent. Thanks so much, Paul. There's a lot of really good information in there. Does anyone have any questions for Paul? No, I guess not. Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, well, did you find, I know that at your plants and probably Warren's as well, but particularly for you, did you find that there was a gap that needed to be bridged in between the immersive experience with the ERP and then your visual factory on the floor? So particularly for inventory management, right? Like we'll have our Kanbans, we'll have all the things that in the visual factory that will signal that we need replenishment, but your ERP essentially controls your inventory within your stores. So was there anything that you needed to do to get those two ways of documenting or of tracking inventory to kind of speak to one another?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think. I mean, I would say they don't speak to each other necessarily, but I think what's important is aligning your process, which is how your people work and what they do to complete their work, and the system which has to align to that. So if there's a piece of information in your ERP system that tells somebody that something needs to be done, that needs to align to the process, and their process might involve steps that are outside of the ERP system. And I think it really just came down to aligning those two steps. So for example, if there's a reorder point that's managed by a Kanban system in the system, then there would be a transaction that somebody would enter into Epicor to reflect that. But the trigger wouldn't come from Epicor in that case.
No, that's great. And so in one of your first slides, you had mentioned prior to or pre-ERP, you had about 100 people, and then now you're looking at 200 staff members. Did your adoption of this, maybe streamlining all the communications and all that stuff, did that kind of impact the need for more employees?
No, I would say that the growth of employees has been independent of our ERP system. So that's been I mean, primarily our growth has been on our engineering side and our production staff, but not so much in our office and support staff. So no, we didn't experience that we needed more people to run the ERP system in our case.
Gotcha. Awesome, thank you. We have a question from Greg who's having trouble with audio, but why do you wish you had gone in the cloud instead of on site?
I think that today cloud would give us some more flexibility. I don't know that I would say that we made the wrong decision at the time, because at the time it felt like the cloud was catching up in a lot of ways to the on-site in terms of its functionality and its data security and so on. But today I think that probably wouldn't be a concern. We have a need now to manage our own server, and that server runs out of memory. So then the question is, do we buy another server or do we switch to the cloud at this point? So I think with cloud, it's the way ERP systems are being developed today. I think they're really aiming at making cloud the preferred option. So today, if we went through the project again, I think I would probably lean more towards the cloud, but I'd still go through the analysis again to make sure that it made sense.
Right. And so he also asked, with the advent of AI, how is Epicor with AI functionality?
Good question. I don't think I've heard of any AI coming down the pipeline with Epicor. But I have to admit, we haven't really explored a sort of follow-on project with Epicor since we went live. So there could be functionality there that we're not aware of, but we're not making use of AI within Epicor today.
Excellent. So just going back to the cloud, if you had to, or if you decided that maybe it's best for us to transfer to the cloud instead of investing in a bigger server or more memory or whatever it is to keep it on site, what considerations in terms of cybersecurity would you have?
Well, I'd want to understand how they keep that data secure. If there was I think we're aware that if you're in the cloud, you're sharing server space with other companies and so on. So how do they keep that data independent in their cloud system? What are their cybersecurity measures to keeping data safe from an outside attacker, I guess? I would certainly want to understand those questions. Now, having said that, they might have much better measures than we have internally. So I would imagine, or my expectation would be that they would have some pretty good answers to that. But I would certainly want to understand that.
Thanks so much, Paul. So if anyone wants to ask Paul additional questions, I'm sure we can funnel it off to him, but we are going to switch over to Warren and listen to Brunswick Steel's story.
All right,
Thank
thanks
you.
very much, Eileen. Perfect. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Oh, sorry, I think I stopped sharing, right? Sorry about
Perfect.
that. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so thanks for joining us, and thanks for taking the time today. So I'm going to be taking a little bit of a different approach than Paul. Paul did a great job explaining, how they implemented and how they went through the full process of implementing. I'm going to be looking at it from a perspective of how did we come up with the idea that we needed to either change systems or come up with a system altogether, right? So the agenda is gonna look like, we're gonna talk about who's Brunswick, how to know if you're ready to implement or change to a new ERP system, the do's and don'ts when implementing, and what to do to maintain, and just some of the lessons learned that we came up with as we went through the process. So for Brunswick itself, so we're a steel processor and distributor. So we offer laser, brake, flame plasma, and saw cutting capabilities. We are a job shop, so very rarely, our average order going through the system is probably about $1,500, $2,000. So we're continuously seeing new drawings, new systems coming into play. And like I said, typically a job shop that we had, so we needed a system that was going to also help us in those capabilities. We are also a stock provider, so we needed a system that was going to work with us on stock, but also on the processing side. We were 53 years in business. We currently have 90 employees, and roughly about 135,000 square feet of floor space is what we currently have. We just finished an expansion that we finished last year, where we added an additional 35,000 square feet. We implemented, no different than Paul, we implemented roughly about 5 years ago the system that we have. And at that time, we were around the 55 to 60 employees. So do we need a system or a new system? So, the biggest thing that, so I should start off by saying that when Brunswick started looking at a new ERP system, I actually wasn't working for Brunswick at the time. I was working for CME as a facilitator, and I was working with them on understanding whether or not they needed a new system or not, or a different system, right? So I spent, I would say, probably days, weeks with them understanding and going through each department and understanding what are the needs that they needed in order to run the business successfully, right? So we came up with a list of what we felt was required in order for the business to be effective, right? And that went right from finance, purchasing, our CAD department, engineering department, sales, and operations, and really, like I said, understanding what is it that every department requires, and understanding what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? What is it that we're looking at needing to do in order for a system to run better? For us at that time, inventory was a real problem, right? We could, if we had 5 or 6 items that the system told us, it was an instant count because odds are they weren't there, right? So it was really understanding that and knowing whatever system we were bringing in, we needed it to be able to help us understand and fix what we couldn't do in our current system. So our current system before that was Stratix. That's the system we were using, and it wasn't a very user-friendly. It was user-friendly on the quoting side, but not so much on the operation side. And that's really what we were looking at. And once we determined what it was that we were looking for by department, is let's go back to our previous provider. Let's give them the opportunity to see if they can actually do the things that we need them to do. And what we found when we went back to Stratix is they could only do probably about 50% of what was required. So which meant that we really needed to look at new systems and what were we gonna look at. So like Paul mentioned, we went through, probably looked at about, I would say 7 or 8 different systems that we were looking at, where we brought in people, had them do their sales pitch to us for us to really understand what we were looking at and what we required. And from there, we made a decision of what we needed to do next. But even before we thought about implementing and even going with the new system, we had to understand were our processes robust enough and function properly, right? Because that's one thing from and I'll give you an example of a previous company I worked with before Brunswick. I went in there, and the first month end that I went into, we ended up being there till midnight because we couldn't close out jobs properly, just so that finance could do their jobs effectively after we were there till midnight. And I asked the group, is this a regular occurrence? Oh yeah, this happens every month. We have to do this. And I'm like, well, I don't have to do this. This is not what I'm looking for. So I actually brought in our ERP consultant at the time and brought him in, and I asked him, can you do an audit of all of our departments to understand where we're at? And when he did it for 4 days, went through every department, met with every department on what they were currently doing. And he came back to me at the end of the week and he said, you guys couldn't be using the system more wrong if you tried. Right. So, and here's the sad part is that everybody felt they were doing a good job and doing the right things. And some people were devastated that we've been doing it wrong up to this point. But again, and I think Paul had mentioned this, is when we're looking at developing and bringing in a new ERP system, or even in a current ERP system, if the ERP system and our process don't match, what do? Right? Do we figure out a workaround outside the system to make it work? And that's what this company did, is we made workarounds on absolutely everything. Or do we try to figure out a process that works within the system? Right. And that's where, we had to spend a lot of time especially with that company, we had to spend a lot of time reworking our processes, redeveloping our processes, and making sure that they functioned effectively, and making sure that everybody was doing the same thing, right? Not different, right? Because one thing we got to remember about an ERP system is, as good as they can be just as bad. You put bad information, it's going to be bad information coming out. Right. So we want to make sure that what we're looking at and what we're doing is really understanding, making sure that those processes are functioning properly. And are they documented? And are people properly trained to them? We need to ensure that that has happened. And for us, we follow the TWI methodology, training with an industry, where we use job instruction for training to ensure that people are trained effectively in all the processes, and that people are doing the exact same thing. That way, it makes it very simple for the system to run effectively. And does everyone understand the importance of following the process? Right? Do people understand, if I don't follow the process properly here, what effect does it have down the road? Right? So, so for example, I know Paul had mentioned we do the exact same thing, is our employees scan in and out of jobs, right? But do they understand the effect if all of a sudden I scan into a job and we have a machine breakdown, but I never scan out of that job? All of a sudden, a job that was supposed to take 2 hours ended up taking 18 hours, and all of a sudden our costs go completely out the window, right? So it's making sure that people understand that we need to follow the processes effectively with the system itself to ensure that we are getting the right information coming out. Otherwise, there's people spending a lot of time investigating and evaluating, why did this go wrong? What went wrong here? And, and it makes it even more difficult as you grow as an organization, right? So like I said, we implemented GSS, or Global Shop Solutions, and we implemented it 5 years ago. But we've probably doubled in our growth since that time, right? So it's, so like Paul mentioned, is when we were looking at the system, does the system allow for growth, and how far, right? Because we want to make sure that we have a system that grows with the business, itself. And don't rush the implementation. I think if that's one thing I would come back to us and say again, is we implemented in 6 months. We should have probably taken the 9 to 12 months that was required. I think we implemented a little bit too fast. And because of that, we spent probably a good year after that fixing and finalizing certain things going through the process. So again, really taking that time and spending that time understanding, and like Paul had mentioned, run the test program first. Run it first to make sure that your systems are functioning, that your systems are functioning properly. And like I said, run the old and new systems side by side. So, and making sure that, the numbers are driving, that the numbers are coming through the way you want them to, and do that again for a good 6 months. So like I said, I mentioned earlier that we currently utilize, and back then we utilized probably about 5 different systems that we used, whether it was for quoting, whether it was for finance, whether it was for nesting that we were doing. We ran probably about 5 different programs. We're now down to 3. Finance works fantastic through GSS. And we do have a couple systems that we have to run outside the system just because of our nesting capabilities that we need to do. And for quoting, GSS doesn't quote effectively when it comes to processing. So the one thing that we needed to make sure was that our 3 systems were going to communicate properly together. And right now the systems are communicating, I would say, okay. But not great, and I'll explain why they're not effectively communicating to one another. So what to maintain? One thing that I talked about is spot check processes and making sure that they're being followed, right? Just to ensure that we are not deviating away from the way the system needs to function or the way it needs to run. If we're not following the process, why? And either retrain or update the process to match what we're doing, so that the system matches, right? And for inventory, one thing I got to say is our inventory has turned around 180% from where it was, right? And part of that is because we set up a cycle count process, right? We set up these types of things so that we've created our ABCD items within the system itself, and the system auto-generates those cycle counts, right? So we know every day, here's the count that needs to happen, here's what we do, and we auto-generate absolutely everything. And like I said, now we can trust the system. We know what the system tells us. And if the system doesn't match, it's easy for us to do an investigation right now and figure out why. Why is there a problem? So to me, that is absolutely massive. And understand when an update to the system needs to happen. So, I know Paul had mentioned, that they're not on the cloud. We are currently not on the cloud with GSS either. We actually started off on the cloud and moved away from the cloud and went to our own internal system. And that was due to how slow the system was on the cloud. And that was totally based on our connectivity here. That had really nothing to do with anything else. It was because, at that time we didn't have a great connection when it came to whether it was Wi-Fi or even our internet. So we did develop our system inside, and it provides its own challenges. Like Paul mentioned, that your servers, they need to be maintained, they need to grow. Big thing for us is, how many backups do you have for your systems, right? Because if your system goes down, what are your backups, and how much time have you lost if you don't have those backups, right? So we currently have 3 different backups that we have, just to ensure that if the system does go down, that if one backup fails, we have multiple backups to go to be able to come back to our previous version. Because we've had server issues. We had one about a year ago, and we lost 10 minutes of data, right? So again, but if we wouldn't have had those backups, it would have been extremely difficult. But now we are looking at actually in December going back to the cloud again. And the reason for that is, cybersecurity is better, way better than it has been in the past. I don't think we have to worry too much about the data breaches that we were maybe worrying about 5 years ago. But also it makes system updates extremely easy. So one thing that we've done is we've worked with our service provider, like we've worked with GSS, and they've developed systems within our own system that maybe isn't a cookie cutter for somebody else, right? So they've developed, and what happens if we do an update like that, those systems can break, and we need to understand that. So we didn't do an update to our system for roughly about 3 years, and we were 2 updates behind. And you could see that the system was slowly starting to fall apart. And the other part of it too is your ERP provider probably won't support older systems as they move forward. So it's extremely important that you update as you go along. Now, we didn't update all the way just because there's still glitches in the current update that they've done, and they told us not to. So they're still working on the glitches, but that's where it's to understand exactly when to update and where to update. So again, like I said, we're probably going to move to the cloud, and part of that is, storage. Part of that is making sure that we're currently staying up to date. And the other thing that I can't stress enough is work with your providers. Right now, and I'll give you an example. We just did an update 2 weeks ago. Fantastic. This is it actually, for the most part, went through without a flaw. It went through really well. But we've also had every department meeting with our current ERP provider, and we don't know what we don't know. And the things that we found out, and I'll give you an example. So for our quality department, right, we were wanting to look at very specific items that we wanted to look at. And what we realized is there was a dashboard that our old system didn't have. Right. So when we updated to the new system, all of a sudden this dashboard came up, and all of a sudden we could see, where all of our quality buckets were heading into and what our costs were. Right. So, and even with our finance department has been working really close with our ERP provider as well. And making sure that we are just doing everything correctly. Right. And so I can't stress enough, just working with your provider. Some of the lessons learned, understand the why and need, right? Just make sure because it's very easy to go down specific rabbit holes if we don't completely understand what we're looking for, right? And also understanding where are we going to be 5 to 10 years from now, or where do we think we're going to be to ensure that the system is going to be able to handle that. Like I said, understand where the company is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years from now to ensure a system can maintain. And again, don't be scared to go back to your provider and ask for help. Extremely important to work simultaneously with your providers. And we've even gotten to the point now where we use Encell for our software when it comes to nesting for our laser. And we've had Encell and GSS working together so that we can make sure that we're allocating our scrap properly from our cuts. Right. We also have SecturaFab, who we're using as our quoting software. They're talking with GSS to make sure quotes are going through effectively into GSS and showing the proper cost and proper pricing. Right. So it's making sure that even if you do have multiple programs that you're working with and have to ensure that they're working together as well to ensure you're getting the best bang for your buck. And that's really about it. Any questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Warren. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Warren?
Live group today.
I know. Well, I feel like we're missing quite a few, but I have a question for you actually. So you talked about how in that previous company that you worked with, how it was just you run into a bunch of roadblocks, specifically about not really understanding what it can do for you, what the ERP can do for you. And so taking those lessons that you learned And then, and currently in this system, if you were to program workarounds, how do you protect yourself to make sure you don't do it so much that your provider can no longer support you? Like, so how do you error proof that?
Well, and that's, and that's good because that's exactly where my previous company, like the previous company that I was at, that's exactly where they were at, where they had done so many workarounds that it became very difficult to get back to working with the system properly again.
Mhm.
Right. And even retraining everybody to run the system effectively. Right. So for us, it was really, again, for Brunswick, it was understanding the need, what we need, and making sure that our processes were robust. So I spent probably 6 years with Brunswick working on processes and creating robust processes with them, especially on the operations side, to ensure that our processes were where they needed to be before we even implemented. Right. So if I take a look at so if I take a look now, we are doing very little outside the system, very little outside the system. And a lot of that has to do with us just monitoring and spending the time spot checking to make sure that we are, and things change, right? As we change, we need to make sure that we're changing our processes as we go along. And that's probably where a big part of the problem comes in with some companies, and especially with the previous company I was at, is you would improve process, but you wouldn't update your procedures to go with it.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden your system doesn't match. And then you all of a sudden are starting to create workarounds just to make it easier. And so just making sure that you are spending the time updating, and like we have one individual that's what he's dedicated to. He's dedicated to training, and he's dedicated to make sure that all of our procedures are all up to date. Not that he's the one updating them, but making sure that they are all up to date to what we're doing and that people are trained to them. And we have an iManage system where we manage all of our training through that system, so we can see exactly where we're at in our training and where we're at with even our retrain, because we go through each of our procedures. I think every 6 months we go through each of our procedures and ensure that everybody signs off and is retrained in them.
Excellent. So do you have, was one of your standards basically for any requests that anyone has with regards to amending or updating the ERP, let's go to the provider first to see if
Yeah,
there's anything that they can
you
do. We're
betcha.
not going to program it in-house until we talk to them first.
100%. Yeah, go to them first, because 9 times out of 10 they'll be able to do it for you.
Excellent. No, that's great. Yeah, because I mean, I've talked to companies and I've worked with companies as well who's just like, we've had this system for so long, but we can't even update it anymore because we've added so many things internally that they can't support us. So
Yeah.
either we have to spend the money to get a completely different system, or we just treat it like a homegrown situation and we just keep adding to it.
Well, and see, and that's funny, because that's part of the problem that we had with SecuraFab, I'm gonna say, with that quoting software, because they created a brand new I'm gonna say they created a system for us to be able to quote effectively.
Mm.
We did an upgrade about a year and a half ago, and it totally broke our system.
Oh,
Totally
gee.
broke it, and it had to be redone. And that's part of the reason, even with them, that we're going to a cloud-based system and making sure that we're running effectively, just so that that doesn't happen again. Because that can play havoc with you for a long period of time if you don't realize that there's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. So I know there are a few people who just joined us. I'm wondering if there was a miscommunication with the time zone, perhaps. But so Paul Gomori and Warren Peters both presented. We have been recording. We can absolutely send this out to you. But in the meantime, does anyone have any questions for either Paul from PTX Trimble or Warren Peters from Brunswick Steel with regards to your own ERP journey? Maybe some of the challenges you've encountered. Maybe they can offer some insight on how to navigate throughout that. No questions? Okay, well, unfortunately, for those of you who just joined us, you did miss the presentations, but again, we will send out the recordings for you so you can have a look. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can connect you to either of our speakers, and we can get some questions answered. So I had mentioned this at the beginning of this Lunch and Learn. We are going to be having a few others down the road. We are looking at robotics, although we might push that out a little bit because we do have a company that, a provider who I've been in talks with. I met them over in Germany during the Hanover Messe, who focus on configurable applications, where it's basically a drag and drop to digitize your software or digitize your SOPs. And you can utilize, edge sensors and things like that in order to make it as streamlined as possible. I do want to connect them with our community and have a webinar with them. And they are interested in coming into the CME office in Winnipeg at some point to have a demonstration. So keep your eyes open for that. I will do an e-blast with our members, and we'll have it on the website when we secure a date. But that would be an amazing opportunity for you to listen to what they have, and then come into CME to try it for yourself. The CEO is from a lean manufacturing background and recognized that there was a gap that needed to be filled in terms of maintaining and standardizing and sustaining their SOPs and making it easy for people to learn. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then we will have our robotics lunch and learn as well. Okay, so I do want to thank Warren and Paul again for joining us today and presenting their story and sharing their ERP journeys with us. I know it is a struggle for a lot of companies who are starting off to even figure out where to start and how to see success. So I do appreciate you coming in and sharing your journeys with us. Okay, with that, we'll see you guys the next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.